Now, this year marks my 10th year on the hobby of watch collecting, and there's some things that I wanted to talk about. Typically, you don't see my face on this channel, but I decided to show you because there's some things I want to talk and it's very personal. Like most little boys growing up, I was looking at watches. I wasn't thinking about them too much, but I liked them. I wanted to have them on my wrist. I still remember the first Casio calculator that I saw and I fell in love with it. I was probably second grade when I saw one. It wasn't easy to find. Back then, you have to understand that there was no internet. If the stores around you didn't have something, then you couldn't find it. But that intrigued me. In the future, I saw more Casio, some Patek that I didn't know what they are really back then, but they looked very cool. They looked like computers, and having a computer on your wrist was revolutionary because technology was just bulky. It was expensive, so I knew those watches were way above my pay grade, especially as a student. I came to the US for the first time to visit in 2005, and that's when I saw a Seiko Kinetic. It was $700, and I thought it was crazy that somebody would spend $700 on a watch. I didn't know what Seiko is. I knew that it sounds good, and I know it. I've seen it in some people's wrist, but that's all I knew. 2014, I went to London. I stayed there. I had some wealthy friends, and that's when I started getting deep into watches because this friend of mine bought what I now know what is, but back then I didn't realize it was a Rolex Daytona, wide dial, the steel bezel, and he bought it. He was all proud that he bought it for £9,500. And that was retail, and back then it was retailing for £12,000, so like $15,000, 2014 money. And he was all happy and proud that he managed to get it this way, and I thought he lost his mind. Keep in mind that at that time I was living in Greece, and that was a year's salary for me. And I thought it was crazy that somebody would even consider buying a watch like that. But he had a full collection, and all his friends had collections of watches, and that's how I got into watches. At some point, he gave me a replica Ulysse Nadir Maxi Marine, and I remember putting it on my wrist and seeing the mechanics of it and falling in love every day more and more. Since I moved to the US, I bought my first Seiko Citizen, moved up to Hamilton's, Oris. And the one thing that I realized was that I was getting deep into the hobby, going to all the nuances of watches, movements, power reserve, bracelet cases, finishing, all the good stuff that a normal watch collector loves. But what happens is, at the very first early stages of YouTube 10 years ago, at least in the watch sector, it was only passionate people that were making watches, like TGV. He was making, Tristano was making amazing videos. He still makes amazing videos, but he was one of the very first, and I'm a subscriber since, so 10 years now. And I was getting into that passion about the watch. But since more and more professionals, dealers have come into the space, they basically what they do, those channels, they are like plugs for their stores, their online stores, so you can go and buy watches from them. What they do, and I'm talking about big channels and smaller channels, what they do, they either try to sell you a watch strap, they either try to sell you a watch, and they're trying, or they have contracts to review watches and give you their opinion that happens to be very positive. So what happens is this: there's some watches that watch collectors love, and depending on your budget, you probably have different favorites. I know that the first watch that I bought to my wife is an Oris, and it's this one. Amazing, amazing watch. 2000 retail, I bought it for a whole lot less than that. And the second watch I bought for my wife was a Rolex because that's what she wanted and I could afford at that point. But that's what the watch collector would typically buy. Well, this is for my wife, but for myself, Hamilton, Cooper, gift from my wife because I told her all the story. She knows I love Interstellar. Then I moved ahead and I bought an IWC Chrono Pilot. And on the wrist, I have my Breitling. This is a world timer, galactic unitime. So the inspiration for this video comes from one of these watch dealers that have channels and many thousands of people watch. And what they say always is, if you see, they focus on 3 brands: AP, Patek Philippe, and Rolex. And the reason why they do that is because that's where the most interest is for most people, especially people that don't know many things about watches, or they see them as an investment, possibly. And they are able to buy and trade them really quickly. The turnover is really fast. Where for an Oris, they can make as much money. Probably the profit that they get from a Rolex is more than when you buy a Rolex, an Oris. And an IWC, even though it keeps decent value, and you can, if you buy it used, you can probably, not lose much. The typical watch you're losing, and because they're not able to turn over their merchandise very quickly, they're not interested. And this specific dealer was making jokes about Breitling and how he couldn't get rid of some watches. And it really hurt my feelings, not because I have a Breitling watch. I could sell it tomorrow and buy something else. I don't have any stock in Breitling, so I don't care. But what is a watch? These people will tell you that it's all about how much you make if you sell it. And in the end of the day, they have 2 different standards. If a Rolex from 90s has hollow links on the bracelet and just a fold over clasp, but it has a sapphire crystal and then a 48 power reserve, then it's an amazing watch. Yes, it's a little older, but it has its gold, it's Rolex, it's this, it's that, and they try to hype it so you can buy it. An IWC from 2015-16, like this one, goes for under the price of a 90s Rolex. And this is because the hype and what they're doing to make you buy that watch and not look in other brands. A watch is not only the movement, it's not only the marketing. A watch is the case, is the bracelet, is the clasp, is the polishing. A watch is the looks. So you can tell me in good conscience to come here and produce, that I would be able to come here and produce videos promoting 3 brands because I want to sell you something. And unfortunately, they have the money, they make the good content. So many of us, including myself, watch those channels. But if you don't have a good background to understand what's really advertising and what's real review, you don't know how to separate the two. And unfortunately, what happens is that these people keep creating a trend towards certain brands. They buy all the merchandise. Like if you ever bought a watch at not even retail, secondary market, and then try to sell it back to a dealer, you will see that even if you think you bought it at a good price, they're going to offer you a whole lot less than what you bought it. So they're trying just to make money on everything. And by doing so, they are destroying the honest collector or enthusiast. So the one thing that I would be aware of is try to understand who's a dealer, who's a real enthusiast. TGV is a real enthusiast. Every now and then he has a collaboration, but that's all. But then you have other people, I'm not going to name anyone, that have big channels that you love. Some scream a lot, some curse a lot. Some will tell your honest opinion about stuff and then redirect you to their online store. But unless you know what you're dealing with, like especially with Breitling, it was very interesting to me to see all the hate because of the way the Breitlings are sold right now. They're placed in the market. And that's US. You have to understand. In the rest of the world, I've been to Germany, and in Germany, most people have Breitlings. So it depends on the market. In the US, Breitling is seeing less off. I remember growing up, being a teenager, early 2000s, mid 2000s. It was 3 watch brands that were the top: Rolex, Omega, Breitling. Of course, there were the Patek Philippe's and APs, but the 3 horsemen back then for the average luxury watch was Rolex, Omega, Breitling. And yes, Breitling did some mistakes. Yes, they produced more than they should. But that doesn't take anything away from the quality. The in-house movement, the in-house case, the in-house dials, the in-house hands, crowns. They make literally 90% of their watches. The bracelets, they make them. You can buy a chronomat right now for $3,000 that is 90% in-house, and it's from mid 2000s or 2010s. And to get something similar for Rolex, you need close to 5 to 10 times the same amount, depending on the model. For Omega, you want 20 to 50% more. But Breitling is down there. Then you have IWC. IWC is very underrated, very underrated. We saw that in the last big watch show. It wasn't Bezel. What was it? It doesn't matter. They came up with the internal calendar, and everybody was talking about Tudor. That Tudor came up with another black bag, blah, 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 this time, and a Jubilee bracelet, but they call it 5-link and whatever. Sure. We're talking internal calendar. Shows the moon phase for, then, I don't know, 4 million years, and all the date correctly for 400 years. But here we are talking about the bracelet of Tudor. So, yeah. And they say, oh, who needs that kind of thing? Well, who needs watches, period? That's luxury. Complications are luxury. If it was any other brand, everybody would fall on it. And if it was Rolex doing that, if it was AP, if it was Patek, everybody would jump and say, oh my God, look how amazing they are. But anyway, enough with the rant. That's what I wanted to say. I want to take it out and share my thoughts because it's getting ridiculous. Professionals are taking over our space, and they try to redirect our interests and our money towards their stores, the brands that they source easily. It's easy to buy many Rolexes because Rolex produce many watches every year, and they can easily trade between them for 50% off, and then they sell you that. They sell you the scarcity, and then they give it to you with double the price. But that's where we are, and we're falling for it. I love Rolexes, don't get me wrong. I have my name for a Sprite, GMT Sprite, the lefty, even though I'm not the lefty, but I just think it's weird enough that I won't get tired of it because Rolexes are really boring for me. But that's it. Let me know what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching. Until the next one. Ciao.